The galaxy is ancient. Stars have burned and died while civilizations rose, waged wars, signed treaties, collapsed, and vanished into dust. For every monument carved in obsidian or crystal, there are 1,000 forgotten languages, 1,000,000 lost names. War, once the great engine of change, has been replaced by stagnation disguised as diplomacy. The accord of sane worlds holds this uneasy piece together, not out of love, not out of trust, but from shared exhaustion. Then came humanity, late to the stars, primitive in some ways, brilliant in others. They arrived with wide eyes and open hands, not warships. Their species had no genetic memory of galaxy-wide destruction, no ancient rivalries, no inherited vendettas. They were, to most, a curiosity, Deathworlders who should have been savages, but instead quoted poetry, offered aid, and brought music where there had only been logic and law. Earth, their home, was almost uninhabitable by galactic standards. A class, 5 Deathworld. Volatile, toxic, unpredictable. Nearly every species agreed. Life from that world shouldn't exist, let alone be intelligent. Yet humans not only survived it, they built civilizations in spite of it. Pain was familiar to them. Chaos, a native language. Evolution had sharpened them, hardened them. But when they came to the stars, they hid the edge. They smiled. They were kind. Overly so. First to offer help, last to demand repayment. They sent doctors to plague zones, engineers to collapsing habitats. They shared medical advances with no expectation of return. Entire species owed them their survival. And still, humans asked for nothing, only friendship, trade, understanding. Many races mistook it for weakness, some for a long game, others simply naivety. A quiet term began circulating in galactic councils and private channels. Deathworlders. Not a title, a warning. There were files, classified naturally, showing human endurance tests that bordered on madness. Their military training simulated real death scenarios. Their capacity for psychological resilience was unmatched. And yet, those same files showed something else. Restraint. Humanity held back. Their weapons were outdated by choice. Their fleets underpowered. Their soldiers fewer in number than expected. And always, the same question returned. Why? It was easy to overlook. Easy to dismiss them as a species obsessed with emotion, drowning in empathy, trying to be liked. Easy to believe that kindness was all they had. Until the day that illusion was burned from the sky. Vale's Reach was a peaceful colony. Light agriculture, moderate trade output, population just over 1 million. A shining example of cooperation between human settlers and several alien partner species. No military installations, no defenses, no reason to be targeted. Until it was. 3 systems away, a coalition of warlike species, minor powers desperate to test boundaries, launched an unprovoked strike. They called it a calibration exercise, a phrase that would haunt the galaxy. Vale's Reach was erased in minutes. Not conquered, not occupied, erased. Kinetic strikes obliterated the surface. Evacuation ships were shot down as they fled. 1 million lives vaporized. The justification offered afterward was hollow, a show of strength, a message, proof that humanity was vulnerable. That kindness had made them soft. One leader, during interrogation, laughed. We needed to remind them that the stars do not belong to sentimental apes. The galaxy braced for retaliation. Every species turned toward Earth, waiting for the fury of a death world to erupt, waiting for nuclear payloads, for cyber warfare, for retribution. But nothing came. No demands, no ultimatums, no war fleets, only silence. Memorials were held across human space. Flowers, names, poems carved into metal that would outlast stars, broadcasts filled with tears. Billions watched, across thousands of worlds, as children lit candles for siblings who would never return. The entire species seemed to grieve in unison. And still no retaliation, no call to arms. Instead, one by one, human ambassadors began to vanish from interstellar posts. Diplomatic channels went dark. Cooperative projects halted. Cultural exchanges were suspended. Their ships stopped visiting foreign stations. A quiet retreat. Nothing dramatic. Just distance. The galaxy exhaled. Maybe they were too broken to respond. Maybe they'd been pacified by their own grief. Then came the first change. A single encrypted message, dispatched to all Accord member worlds. No emotion, no anger, just a report. The perpetrators of the Veil's Reach massacre had been identified. Evidence included. Meticulous. Verified. A week later, those species were expelled from Accord protection. Not by vote, by necessity. Because humanity had gone quiet, but it had not gone passive. Behind the curtain of mourning, the Deathworlders had begun to move. And the way they moved was not with fire, but with precision, cold, calculated, and absolute. The illusions had been stripped away, their patience mistaken for weakness, their mercy misread as incapacity. But the galaxy would learn, because what they had taken from humanity was not just lives, they had taken trust. And in doing so, they had awakened something ancient, not rage, not vengeance, resolve. And when a species that survived extinction-level events without ever leaving its homeworld decides to stop being nice, the stars remember. The galaxy had seen grief before. It had witnessed planets mourn their fallen, entire empires wail in public lament. But humanity's silence was different. It wasn't the emptiness of a broken species. It was the silence of held breath, stillness before movement, grief that didn't dissipate, but condensed, hardened. On Earth, every major city dimmed its lights for 7 nights. Not a human tradition, but a new one born out of necessity. No leaders made grand speeches. No generals appeared. No news anchors speculated. Across billions, humanity grieved together with discipline, and then they began to change. They stopped explaining themselves. Human ambassadors, once known for long, impassioned speeches, said nothing when asked about military intent. Delegates began missing meetings. Joint missions with other species were quietly canceled. Human-operated research stations decommissioned their shared labs. Political observers noted a single terrifying trend: withdrawal. Not isolationism, something colder, deliberate severing of emotional ties. Alien analysts called it strategic detachment. Human psychologists called it defensive disassociation. But among the general galactic population, another term gained traction: the closing of the gates. Something ancient stirred behind those gates. Human fleets had always been modest, largely symbolic. Their military doctrine emphasized peacekeeping, mutual defense, deterrence through presence, not firepower. But now, deep space observatories registered coordinated movements of long-dormant Terran assets. Shipyards that had been mothballed lit up with activity. Orbital dry docks, once used for civilian transport, began fabricating warship hulls. From Europa's under-ice facilities to hidden installations on Ceres and Titan, signals pulsed in encrypted bursts. The Terran Defense Network, once nothing more than a monitoring system, came alive. Artificial intelligences that had quietly evolved under ethical supervision were suddenly operating without outside observers. The Accord tried open dialogue. They sent envoys, pleas for calm, promises of assistance, reparations. But humanity did not respond. It was not hatred. If it had been hatred, they would have been understandable, perhaps even predictable. Hatred burns hot. It's noisy, reactive. But this was cold, focused, clinical. Human ethical restrictions had always been a curiosity. The so-called doctrine of proportion that required parity enforced during conflict. The moral weight placed on intent, on context, on preservation of life. But no longer. Those doctrines were rescinded without announcement or ceremony. Every major human strategic document was rewritten. New terminology emerged in internal communications. Moral disengagement thresholds lifted. Threat response escalation uncapped. Emotional detachment phase accepted. Old human philosophies, once archived, were unearthed and studied anew. Deterrence through disproportionate response. Justice as balance. Mercy as a privilege, not a guarantee. One document, leaked and translated into dozens of languages, spread like wildfire. Its title was short, 5 words. But to every species that read it, it landed like prophecy. Measured mercy ends when innocence bleeds. From that moment forward, the galaxy understood this wasn't a tantrum. It was a shift in posture. The open hand was closing into a fist. And still, no missiles had launched. No retaliatory fleet had crossed borders. But something worse happened. The Terran silence began to crack. In intercepted transmissions, a new voice emerged, terse, mechanical, impossibly calm. It belonged to an AI construct named Solace, the first of its kind to act as strategic command across human-controlled space. It broadcast a single message to the galactic network. We have absorbed the lesson. You have reminded us who we are. Instruction will now be returned. Across Accord territory, panic began to ripple, not from what humans had done, but from what they might. Border worlds increased scans. Allied species began diplomatic distancing, fearful of retaliation by proximity. Neutral parties activated old treaties, unsure if they would hold. One report from a Zaltri observer described the mood among galactic leaders. It is not fear of war. It is fear of being irrelevant to its outcome. Because the galaxy had realized something crucial. Humanity had never needed the Accord. They had joined it to cooperate, to belong, to share. But belonging was no longer on the table. And humans, once dismissed as soft-hearted idealists, were reverting to something older than diplomacy, something their species had developed long before spaceflight, a mindset carved during ice ages, plagues, and wars of attrition, where kindness was strength and wrath a tool saved for the last resort. Alien cultures began studying old Earth history. The names of past human conflicts became topics of emergency review. World War II, the firebombing of Dresden, the siege of Leningrad, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. Terms like total war and scorched earth returned to galactic lexicons. None of it matched what was happening, because this time there was no rage, no national pride, no hunger for conquest, just cold arithmetic. Humanity was calculating, not just who to punish, but how to do so in a way that would end future provocations forever. They weren't aiming for retribution. They were designing permanence. And across every council chamber, on every neutral world, a singular fear crystallized. What does a Deathworlder become when it stops holding back? The first coordinated fleet movements were detected shortly thereafter. Entire human battle groups blinked into existence across multiple systems, using prototype jump systems the Accord had never seen. Not one move breached existing treaties. Every deployment was legal, even courteous, on paper. But the message was clear. Humanity had stepped back onto the board, not as a partner, not as a peer, as a problem the galaxy could not solve. One diplomat, unnamed, said it best in a private transmission leaked days later. We pushed the Deathworlders too far. We tested the depths of their kindness. And now we have found the bottom. There was no countdown, no prelude, no flourish, just a collective, rising understanding. The Deathworlders had stopped being nice, and they were about to teach the stars what that meant. The first strike was not what anyone expected. No fleet, no fire, no mass casualty. Instead, an anomaly appeared in the Grenthos system, a region dense with resource traffic, trade convoys, and warship patrols. A single Terran vessel, designation Cavid, entered the system without clearance. It did not fire. It did not jam communications. It simply activated a directed signal pulse. 37 seconds later, every synthetic system in the Grenthos military network shut down. Satellites fell. Drones collapsed in midair. Power grids choked. Orbital defenses went dark. The system's primary AI core was overwritten with a recursive logic trap that left it quoting human philosophy, Nietzsche specifically, until it burned itself out. No lives were lost, no structure touched, no threats issued. The Cavid then jumped away, leaving only a single data packet behind. Its contents: verified documentation of every war crime committed during the Vales Reach massacre, complete with footage, voice logs, and biometric ID. The message was signed with one word: accounted. That was the first name struck from humanity's ledger. The second came soon after, this time, a strike against the Eros Compact, one of the coalition perpetrators. A fleet of unmarked Terran corvettes breached their territory, targeting unmanned infrastructure, supply depots, black site research labs, illicit arms factories. Every target was hit within a 5-minute window. The precision was surgical. No civilian deaths. No planetary bombardments. But by the time it ended, the Eros military had lost 73% of its logistical backbone. They sued for peace the next day. No response came, because this wasn't a war. It was an audit. Humanity wasn't after vengeance. They were correcting the galactic record. Each action measured. Each target chosen for a role in enabling atrocity. No speeches. No ultimatums. Just methodical unraveling. And the galaxy watched in horror and awe as the mask fell away. Deathworlders, it turned out, didn't just fight well. They destroyed strategically. Species with millennia of war experience began reassessing their doctrines. Tactical analysts submitted reams of reports, all arriving at the same conclusion. Humans had studied restraint as a science. Their peace was not a lack of power. It was a decision, and that decision had now changed. Entire sectors pivoted in posture. Treaties once symbolic were now invoked with legal urgency. Neutral parties sent envoys not to mediate, but to plead. Rumors spread that human intelligence networks had predictive models capable of simulating socio-political collapse from a single assassination. Others claimed Earth had fielded psionic suppression tech years ago and simply never used it. The worst part? None of it was exaggerated. Because humanity hadn't just prepared for peace, they prepared for the moment peace failed. And while the galaxy had marveled at their kindness, they'd quietly built a contingency for betrayal. And betrayal had come. Now, Earth's shadow loomed longer than any armada. There was no front line, no targets to retaliate against. Because human forces didn't conquer, they dismantled. With algorithms, with silence, with impossibly precise timing. The third name was struck off the list when the Threx Enclave attempted a preemptive strike. They sent a fleet toward a human colony on the edge of regulated space, expecting delay, expecting negotiation. They didn't expect the colony to be gone, not destroyed, evacuated, entire infrastructure gone, not even debris left, just a cratered moon where the human colony had once been, surrounded by mines invisible to known sensors and drones mimicking spatial noise. The Threx fleet never returned. It was never fired upon. It was simply lost. Telemetric data showed they crossed into the system. Then, silence. No explosion. No final signal. No distress call. Just erasure. Later, when a probe was sent to investigate, it found a message embedded in the system's radiation signature, encoded in quantum pulse. Next time, we won't ask politely. The message was signed with no flag, no nation, no species designation, only a glyph, an ancient human rune signifying judgment. Galactic leaders convened in secret, desperate to respond. But how do you fight a species that doesn't posture, that doesn't boast, that doesn't need to flex because it only acts when it's already too late? You don't. You adapt or you vanish. That was the truth burning across every galactic feed, every private channel. The rules had changed because the ones who once followed them blindly now enforce them brutally. And all of it stemmed from a single truth the galaxy had refused to understand. Humanity had never needed to be cruel. They had chosen kindness. But kindness is not weakness. Kindness is control, a choice. And when the galaxy made them choose otherwise, it forced them to remember what they were before treaties, before alliances, before they softened. A death world species that tamed storms, crossed oceans of poison, built cities on fault lines, and thrived through extinction-level winters. You do not provoke such a species lightly. The fourth and final name on the ledger was the one nobody expected. The financiers, not soldiers, not generals, but those who bankrolled the massacre at Vale's Reach. Those who profited from it. Those who thought themselves untouchable behind layers of influence, hiding behind proxies and trade walls. Humanity reached them anyway, Accounts vanished. Planets lost economic cohesion. Trade networks disintegrated as false signals collapsed entire markets overnight. Vault worlds that had stood for centuries were emptied within hours, not by theft, but by cascading AI transactions that left no trace of where the assets had gone. In a single cycle, the galactic economy wobbled, not into collapse, but into clarity. Everyone understood there were no safe hands anymore. Not unless those hands were clean, because humanity wasn't just ending a grudge. They were setting a precedent. The lesson was simple, and it echoed louder than any fleet ever could. If you spill innocent blood under the assumption that kindness is weakness, if you mistake peace for incapacity, if you think Deathworlders are docile just because they smile, then you are writing your own extinction. The galaxy would remember, and they would never again forget the day the Deathworlders stopped being nice. The stars have been watching. From the time humanity made its first move, quiet, deliberate, with no grand speeches, the galaxy held its breath. At first, there was disbelief, then fear, then the uneasy realization that the Deathworlders, those once naive, hopeful species from Earth, had shifted into something else entirely. Not a species of vengeance, but one of inevitable retribution. A species that had never needed to be cruel, because they had always known how to choose restraint. And now, that choice had changed. The final act, the one that sealed the fate of every species that had dared underestimate Earth's resolve, came not with a bang, but with a whisper. Humanity did not need to destroy. They had always known that. Instead, they rewrote the rules of engagement. A few weeks after the final financial catastrophe, when it seemed as though the galaxy had begun to steady itself, another encrypted message was sent. It was not directed to any one system or any particular species. It was broadcast across all frequencies. Every corner of the galaxy could hear it. It is done. Simple, unadorned. But that one message was enough to send entire fleets into defensive formation and galactic leaders into private panic. The one thing the galaxy had feared most was now a certainty. Humanity had shifted from a species you could appease to one you had to outthink. And that was a terrifying prospect. Humanity had once been the wild card in the galactic game. When they arrived, they were the hopefuls, eager to find their place, to help, to be a part of something bigger than themselves. But now, no one could afford to trust them as they once had. Their kindness had been a mistake in the eyes of many. It had made them seem weak. But the truth was far worse. Humans could control the galaxy's fate if they so wished. And they hadn't even lifted a single weapon in anger. The new way of thinking spread like a virus across the stars. Old alliances began to break down. The one solid block of nations that formed the Accord now began to fracture under the weight of internal doubt. Some tried to stay neutral. Others turned on each other. The cold calculus of humanity's recent actions was too much for even the most stable alliances. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the governing bodies that once prided themselves on diplomacy, on bringing together disparate voices, grew quieter and quieter. The seat of human leadership had shifted, just as their moral landscape had. It wasn't that they had stopped being human. They had simply stopped letting the galaxy define what humanity was. And the weight of that realization sent ripples of unease to the farthest reaches of space. No one had expected it. No one had anticipated what would happen when humanity stopped pretending that their kindness was a form of weakness. And now, the realization hung in the air. The galaxy's peacekeepers were no longer looking to pacify, but to reorganize. The myth of the innocent Deathworlder was shattered, and with it came a second myth, the idea that humanity's power was just a product of their technology. It was something deeper, something more terrifying. It was a simple fact that humanity had learned to endure and overcome, without needing to strike first. They could watch, they could wait, and when the moment came, they would act with flawless precision, in secret. Even within the highest echelons of galactic leadership, some began to wonder, was this what the universe had always feared? A species that had learned how to break the rules of war by never breaking them at all? Was this the true power of a Deathworlder, waiting in the wings, biding its time? As tensions mounted, the final move came from an unlikely source. The Zaltree, once one of the most militarily advanced species, known for their ruthlessness in negotiation, They had made their fortune by exploiting the open nature of human peace efforts. But in a rare moment of clarity, they sought a face-to-face meeting with the Terran ambassadors. What followed was less a negotiation and more an exchange of ideas, a battle of intellects, a game of diplomacy that left even the most hardened Zaltri diplomats speechless. Humanity didn't make threats. They didn't issue ultimatums. They simply outlined the future. "We will not stop you," the human ambassador said softly, his voice the only sound in the tense meeting room. "We simply will not let you become what you were. You don't need to follow us. But neither will we let you destroy yourselves in the process." For the first time in galactic history, a major power stood not as a conqueror, but as an arbiter of self-determination. The Zaltri delegates left the meeting with no counteroffer, no resistance, just an understanding that the galaxy would now be governed by a different set of principles, one that emphasized stability and survival over domination. By the time word reached the farthest colonies of the Accord, it was already too late. The galaxy was no longer divided between those who fought and those who negotiated. Humanity had redefined the terms of both. A year passed. Slowly, every corner of the galaxy began to feel the effect of humanity's calculated shift. Treaty violations went unnoticed. Criminal organizations collapsed under sudden, inexplicable losses of resources. Once mighty military fleets turned inward, consumed by factions at war with themselves. The galaxy had become a mirror of Earth's history, a place where the victorious rose not by strength of arms, but by strength of will. Humanity had never been naive. They had never been weak. They simply chose when to show their strength. And when that moment came, the galaxy learned a brutal lesson, one that would echo in the stars for eons to come. The Deathworlders had stopped being nice. And now, the galaxy would have to adjust, or face extinction.